Very good. Thank you, Sarah. Let me welcome everybody today to today's CJJA Power Hour. We have extended our audience today, and we've done that purposefully. I think this is a really important subject matter, and we have three fantastic partners with us today who are going to present this information. Obviously the title of today's presentation is Eliminating Barriers to Education and Successful Reentry. Next slide, please. I want to just bring you up to date. My name being Kevin Shepard with CJJA, I'm the project manager there. And as far as guidelines and housekeeping, everyone should enter. There's my photo. All right, we get that out of the way. Let's get beyond that, and everyone will enter the presentation on mute. If at the end you want to come off and ask questions, you can simply do that. You are welcome to questions into Sarah, should it be the Q&A function or the chat function?
The Q&A, please, so that way we're able to track it and we don't lose anybody. We'll look at the chat too, but we'd like the questions just focused in the Q&A so we can make sure we follow up with them.
All right, very good. And for your information, this webinar is being recorded. If for some reason when you're asking questions you don't want to appear on screen, please take yourself off the video. The presentation will get sent out in a link to everybody who has signed up and registered for this event today, and that should take place sometime early to mid next week. And for our panelists today, I want to welcome them. First, we have Sarah Ahrens from Huntington Learning Center, who's going to be talking to us quite a bit today about the importance of supplemental education. She will be followed by Paul Sheffield from Full Mind, who is going to talk about staffing and how that works into success of our youth that are in the juvenile justice system. And finally, Stephanie Savely will finish things up and talk to us all here today about the importance of preparing for successful reentry and what that means to youth who are coming back from juvenile justice facilities. Just a little bit of an unsolicited opinion from myself here today. I've been in the juvenile justice arena for 30 plus years, and I firmly believe that the most important and the best way to break the cycle of incarceration that we see in these families and these communities is to educate these young people and let them be able to, spread their wings when they get back into the community and find successful employment and to get engaged and be productive citizens. So I think it's really important what we're going to talk to about here today. And I'm really pleased to have our guests with us. So with that, I want to allow Sarah to start things off and take it from there.
Thank you so much, Kevin. We appreciate you sponsoring us and enabling us to be with you and all of the folks who share our mission in juvenile services. And our mission at Huntington Learning Center is to give every student the best education possible. And we underline the word every in this case because we support students from all walks of life, and for nearly 50 years have provided students with rehabilitation through individualized educational support. And according to the Youth and Juvenile Justice System National Report by the OJJDP, NIJ, and NCJJ in 2022, the juvenile justice system was founded on the concepts of rehabilitation through individualized justice. So hopefully in our webinar today, you will see the ways in which individualized justice is predicated on building a really strong educational foundation. And so we're going to begin by taking a review of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention's continuum of care, as sort of an umbrella to get us into this subject today. So this continuum of care model you may be familiar with. It specifically outlines a broad array of youth justice programs and services that range from prevention programs for children and youth who are at risk of delinquency to intervention programs serving youth that are in high-risk settings, residential secure facilities, as well as reentry for youth returning to their communities. And this framework has been shown to improve youth outcomes, reduce recidivism, and ideally, the goal would be to work with the majority of the youth in the prevention and diversion stages or early and low intervention so that we can really avoid the worst of the consequences for these youth in the system and the communities from which they come. The other component of this that we'd like to lift up is the cost effectiveness of this model. According to research from the Justice Policy Institute, average state cost for secure confinement is an average of about $250,000 a year, whereas support and diversion programs could be as little as $27,000 a year, as well as the extended long-term economic and societal benefits. And in fact, a study published in the Economic Review called The Effect of Education on Crime, Evidence from Prison Inmates' Arrests and Self-Reports, found that foundational education and high school degree significantly reduced criminal activity. And the numbers speak for themselves. They determined that a mere 1% increase in the high school completion rate of males alone would save the US a conservative $2.3 billion by today's dollar estimates. And so that goes a long way to not just be the right method and intervention for the youth and their families, but also for the funding agencies that are supporting them, where many more students could be helped and many more could be avoided in incarceration altogether. And so increasing the high school graduation rate actually offers more benefits when both crime reductions and economic and social productivity is considered. So this is really a win-win for everybody. Let's take a look next at what are the characteristics of a high-quality juvenile justice education. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Education and the Department of Justice partnered to recommend guiding principles for providing high-quality education in juvenile justice secure care settings. In 2015, the Council of State Governments Justice Center also issued similar best practices. And in 2022, our partners at the National Partnership for Juvenile Services published their domains for a high-quality juvenile justice education. So when we combine and view all of these recommendations together, they outline a very comprehensive approach to improving education in juvenile justice facilities, emphasizing alignment with community standards, student well-being, and smooth transitions back into society. And so the major headings that these best practices fell beneath really will be talked about throughout all of the panelists today. And you will see the way in which each of our resources that we bring to the field of juvenile justice education is very much in alignment with these characteristics of best practices and standards by those in the administrative places setting these expectations. So the first thing is educational quality and accountability. It's really important to ensure that the same educational and vocational services are given to justice-involved youth as to the broader community, and that these programs align with state and national standards, and that they are accredited with sufficient funding to meet these level of community and state standards for everyone. The next we look at is curriculum and instruction. It's important to use rigorous, individualized curricula, again, aligned with standards and appropriate for the unique needs of each student. Incorporating special and remedial education as needed, which we'll talk about today, as well as the proper collection of data to track progress and participation and make data-driven decisions, using technology safely and effectively, and preparing students for college, careers, and independent living, which we'll also be discussing. The next crucial component is a supportive environment, which comes as no surprise here. The importance of recruiting and retaining qualified teachers with relevant skills for justice-involved youth, maintaining appropriate student-teacher ratios, and creating safe and consistent, predictable environments that are trauma-informed, that promote trust and learning for the whole child. And that's super important with at-risk youth. And finally, using positive behavioral interventions and restorative practices to manage challenging behavior when it arises. And finally, along those lines, really utilizing social emotional development and transitions so that when youth leave the secure setting, they have the tools emotionally and mentally to be resilient, to continue forming and maintaining relationships with their community and educators and those who are support networks, and to really facilitate that reentry with collaboration of families and youth-based organizations. So as we can see, a high quality educational support for at-risk youth serves as a really powerful protective mechanism against delinquency, as well as a critical component of rehabilitation to those who are already involved. So whatever stage along the continuum of care, proactively serving the needs of the youth not only provides them with the foundation necessary for a successful future, but also really yields long-term economic and societal benefits. So next, we're going to look at how academic adversity and juvenile justice system involvement are deeply bidirectional and intertwined. It's a very complex relationship, and in particular, that back and forth cycle of disadvantage impacts particularly vulnerable and at-risk youth. Factors like poverty, family instability, and community violence only really exacerbate these issues as well. Justice-involved youth often face subpar educational environments, frequent school changes, lost instructional time, non-transferable credits, all of which lead to higher dropout rates and further or deepening involvement with the system. Many of these youth have learning disabilities or require special education, but often lack adequate support, as there is not really a strong enough connection between individualized student needs and prevention, diversion, or treatment interventions, which tend to be more broad or sweeping. And the academic adversity that we're going to delve into now really encompasses the challenge that hinders students' progress, often really intertwined and causing a lot of the behavioral difficulties that end students up in the justice system to begin with. There's a strong bidirectional link in the research between academic struggles and behaviors like anxiety, depression, and disruption. And students who face academic challenges may exhibit problem behaviors even as coping mechanisms for environments that they cannot manage, where the academic demands are exceeding their personal capacity. And this leads to further cyclical disengagement from schoolwork and attendance. And as we know, truancy and lack of attendance at high absenteeism is a significant number of the youth coming into the system under status offenses. And so really focusing on that reason why they're disengaging from school because of their lack of skills is a huge way to cut that number back down. And unfortunately, the COVID pandemic worsened all of these issues, amplifying learning loss, executive functioning struggles, disruptive behaviors, with over 70% of teachers reporting increased classroom disruptions, as well as an increase from 2019 of 70% in absenteeism for both students and teachers. So nobody's in the classroom, it seems, much these days. And so all of this chronic stress and these related factors really make it that much more difficult to manage cognitive and emotional regulation and to really keep in the loop of what's happening at school. So addressing all of these challenges requires a holistic approach that combines both academic interventions along with social emotional support, because early identification can prevent negative outcomes and reduce the behavior problems and really foster much longer term success for these youth. So we can look now at one of the first components of root causes of academic adversity, and that is individuals with disabilities. So there are many sorts of challenges and disabilities, disorders, neurotypes, differences that impact students and would give them a classification under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Students that have mental, physical, and behavioral health challenges, cognitive, neurological, or other learning differences, developmental delays, neurodivergent challenges, autism, ADHD, spectrum, intellectual developmental differences and disabilities, hearing, visual, speech, language, motor impairments, traumatic brain injury, and other things which may impact a student's ability to sit in a classroom and learn what their peers are learning at the same rate and pace to be able to keep up with those other students. And so most of the youth in facilities are impacted by one or more of these challenges that do fall under the IDEA and would be considered classified as either a 504 or an IEP under that act. And as you can, I'm sure, have experienced, these things often feed into one another as well. So if we look at the next slide with our statistics, we can see that 65 to 70% of youth at any point of contact from prevention and diversion through release meet the criteria for a disability, a rate that's more than 3 times higher than that of the general population. 85% of juveniles in the system are considered functionally illiterate. 60% of adult prison inmates are functionally illiterate, and over 70% cannot read above a 4th grade level. Inmates have a 70% chance of returning to prison if they receive no literacy support, as opposed to only a 16% chance of recidivism for those who do. That is an absolute tremendous differential just by virtue of being able to read. Students not reading at grade level by 3rd grade are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school than proficient readers, and delinquents also demonstrate lower verbal IQs as well as lower school achievement. Finally, 33% of inmates who dropped out of high school reported academic difficulties as the cause. So the math lines up. It's not difficult to see where the challenges lie and what needs to happen. And in its model programs guide, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention shares research which demonstrates that compared to non-disabled youths who commit offenses, those with intellectual and developmental disabilities tend to commit more serious offenses, are at a much higher risk of recidivism, and enter the justice system at a younger age. And youths with disabilities are also more likely to become involved with the child welfare system because of a higher risk of abuse and maltreatment by parents or guardians. And so we can see that these are the challenges that face our youth. And the Department of Justice acknowledges that, quote, the link between academic failure and delinquency, violence, and crime is welded to reading failure, end quote. The Coalition for Juvenile Justice also created standards of care for youth with undiagnosed or mistreated disabilities, which call for law enforcement and family serving systems to educate, engage, and support families and youth in plans for effective services and interventions, developing a holistic approach for addressing all of the child's needs, both in and outside of school hours, with increased involvement with mentors, coaches, and youth development approaches. And this is also the approach that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act recommends as well, that court intake personnel investigate pre-court efforts to identify and address special education needs to ensure that referring systems provide that information and accommodations properly before other school mental health or other social service systems refer to the disability system or refer to the justice system as that referral and involvement will only likely exacerbate the problems. So as we can see, that is one heavy burden that the youth in the system carry. Another heavy burden is the adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and trauma. There are many reasons why students face academic adversity, and at least 75% of the youth in the justice system have experienced some form of traumatic victimization themselves. Known as adverse childhood experiences, or ACE. Compared to the general population, youth offenders were 13 more times likely to have at least one adverse childhood experience, and 4 times more likely to be exposed to 4 or more of these experiences. And youth with a higher prevalence of ACEs are more likely to be serious, violent, and chronic offenders. And in multiple studies, authors have estimated that 25 to 30% of incarcerated youth meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, which can also be considered under the mental and emotional impairments that we just saw under the IDEA as well. And so we know that these kids are far overrepresented as well among justice-involved youth, and that this number of youth in foster care is only rising. In addition to adverse childhood experiences, students experience academic adversities due to disadvantages that rise from socioeconomic and geographic factors, family history, substandard educational environments, as well as poor quality schools, curricula, resources, having English as a second language, being a migrant, or any other of these implications that will ultimately create challenges and skill gaps in a student's educational foundation that have long-range repercussions. And so creating trauma-informed student engagement begins with building capacity in the students emotionally before we do so academically, to make sure that they really understand what the value is for themselves and can see the potential and the opportunities available to help reverse the impact of the adversities that they have faced. So now we're going to look at another implication of academic adversity and root cause. And this is the time that students spend out of school. They encounter a range of interruptions that can derail their education and increase their likelihood of involvement. First, we have any sorts of residence or school displacement and disruption. Those impacted by homelessness, migrancy, the justice system, or welfare involvement are often moving frequently or experiencing great disruptions for a variety of reasons in their educational continuity. We just talked a little bit about chronic absenteeism, which has risen sharply, particularly among low-income students, increasing from 15% in 2019 to 30% in 2023, so doubling. And missing more than 10% of high school days actually increases the risk of dropout by 7 times. So this does easily become a vicious cycle. And we know that truancy accounts for 58% share of status offense cases. And it's these cases that are increasing, while all other sorts of and types of cases are on the decline. And we also see that when we studied 400 ninth graders incarcerated, that in the year prior to detention, they had attended school barely half of the time and were failing most of their courses. And so students with the history of truancy and grade retention are particularly vulnerable for becoming trapped in this academic failure chain. We also know that suspension and expulsion are significant issues with regard to time out of school. Exclusionary discipline practices, often without due process, disproportionately impact students of color, especially Black students who experience more severe suspensions for similar infractions and at twice the rate. Students with learning disabilities or low academic performance are also more likely to face suspension. And the major risk factors for expulsion for disciplinary reasons is a poor grade point average and achievement scores, particularly in English and math, eligibility for special education, habitual truancy, and a history of previous suspensions. So the cycle just keeps continuing for the students who find it very difficult to escape because there's not that support to get them the skills they need. Schools are often notified of students' justice involvement, which leads to alternative school placements or exclusion from in-person activities and classes, even before a youth has been found guilty. And this often increases a student's risk of justice system involvement because they are excluded from the education that would otherwise prevent them from becoming more deeply involved. And finally, there's time and treatment, time out of school for treatment and intervention. Youth in detention often lack consistent access to education, with many actually receiving minimal or no instruction during confinement. 20 to 20% of students didn't attend classes, rising to up to 41% in diagnostic centers. 34% of youth in large detention facilities of over 100 residents lacked educational programs altogether, and only 5 to 10% of youth exiting the justice system ever returned to school to graduate. So as we can see, there are so many factors that derail a student's educational platform and foundation. And when this happens, school and learning can really become more of a liability than an asset by further compounding trauma and existing risk factors. And so ultimately, we need to look at how do we improve this with better educational options. So now let's take a look at the difference between special education and supplemental education. We've now seen a wide range of learning differences, disabilities, delays, or disruptions that can prevent students from acquiring or retaining the skills needed for appropriate educational advancement. And these challenges impact the majority of detained students or incarcerated youth and actually legally require special education services. While most of these students qualify, even when those legally required modifications and accommodations are put in place, they actually don't address the root deficiencies which prevent students from functioning at the level of their peers. So we're going to consider the analogy of a child who does not know how to swim, but needs to be in the pool, or in this case, the classroom with their peers. So there are 3 options for support, which are not mutually exclusive. The first is accommodation, and this involves providing life vests or swimmies, flotation devices for the youth to be able to go into the deep end of the pool with peers and stay above water. Accommodations adjust how students engage with the material. So for instance, providing better seating if the student has a visual impairment, or written notes, or some other support material that helps them to engage with the material in the classroom and stay with their peers. Modification involves changing the expectation from being in the deep end to being in the shallow end, which is more accessible based on the student's capabilities. So this changes what the students are expected to learn. Instead of working at a 9th or 10th grade level, perhaps their curriculum is on 7th or 8th grade level, if that's what their facility is at that point and their capacity. So we're changing potentially the how and potentially the what of students' content. And that is where special education, for the most part, has its capacity, because there are limitations to what it can do for each individual student, even though they all have their individualized educational plans or programs. When we look at how these processes start, before we'll talk about supplemental education and the difference there, we can see that in special ed and supplemental ed, both involve an individualized evaluation at the start of it to discern what the issues are that the student is facing and what work they need to do. And so in special education settings, this can be a 60 to 90 day time frame to administer an evaluation, and it could take another month or so for that to get implemented. In supplemental education, we have the ability to act immediately upon a family or facility's request to assess the student, and provide recommendations within a day or so. And so that is of the agreement. So this is where we are able to get a much quicker read and a much quicker implementation to supplemental education. When we look at progress reporting in special education, that is given on each period's report card, whereas in supplemental education, we meet monthly or as often as necessary with all the stakeholders, um, including families, guardians, caseworkers, managers, teachers, administrators, whoever is in support of that youth in that stakeholder team. We will meet monthly to review all of the students' progress, the concerns, the goals, what's happening with us and the student in our programming, as well as what's happening with the student at home and in other locations where their education is carrying outward. When we reevaluate, the reevaluation on a formal special education case would be every 1 to 3 years. Our reevaluation in supplemental education is every 2 to 3 months. Because the program changes are made regularly and they are based on in the moment student needs and the student's individualized adaptive progress, we need to be reevaluating with formal assessments every few months to make sure that we're on track and meeting the goals that were set forth. Program changes in special education generally tend to be made more during an annual review basis based on reports or observations by the special education team that is involved with the parents if they are interested to participate in that. So there are a number of differentials in terms of timeframes and things like that. The biggest distinction is in the process and the educational methodology. So whereas special education focuses on accommodations and modifications of what and how students learn based on their existing limitations, supplemental education provides remediation of core skills. So this involves teaching the child how to swim step by step, starting back in the shallow end of the pool, or they can put their feet on the ground and they can feel stable because a lack of stability is one of the challenges. And they can feel that they are able to not be underwater and really be able to manage what's being asked of them in that shallow end. And then the student is educated in each incremental component of what they need, piece by piece, remediating all of the skill gaps that have been causing their poor academic performance, which will generally lessen a student's need for accommodations and modifications in the future. And so special education in schools predominantly focuses on these accommodations and modifications because they're easier to implement and they require less direct teacher and administrative intercession. And again, while these interventions allow students to continue learning along with their peers, it often means that the root problems aren't really addressed. 14% of elementary school students receive special education, but that increases to 26% for the standard population in middle and high school students because those kids are getting farther and farther behind. Supplemental education is also known as high impact or high dosage tutoring, and it has the power to provide that remedial foundational academic skill building from the ground up. And this is where the US or the National Educational Association has endorsed this approach as one which has the power to dramatically increase and improve student achievement over any other kind of educational intervention. Recent studies have shown that just 50 hours of personalized supplemental instruction, which is about the equivalent of 8 school days of time, can yield up to 15 months of academic rehabilitation and learning recovery, which is about 1 to 2 grade levels. So these gains, of course, are even more pronounced for students who are disadvantaged economically, racially, or are in other ways considered at risk. And so we're going to take a look at a new paradigm with the Huntington Advantage. As we've been discussing, a student's education can derail for many reasons, but the cause is not as important as the cure. So I mentioned that we start with our individualized approach. with an extensive academic evaluation that includes a nationally normed standardized assessment. And this enables us to determine where the student's capacities are and where we must go back. One size does not fit all. And so these individualized programs intentionally begin at that shallow end of the pool at a point just below the student's current threshold of comfortability, which stacks the deck in their favor and yields immediate positive reinforcement in the results. So for a first time in a long time, or maybe ever, the student feels success as opposed to frustration or failure. And the more success the student experiences, the more quickly they move through the program because it's adaptive to their development, which provides them with a lot of agency and empowerment. And as I'd said, creating trauma-informed student engagement must begin with these emotional components of building first the skills, then we build the confidence that builds more motivation in our chart here at the bottom, which continues to develop skills and moves that into a very affirmative cycle of success versus a failure chain, which is what many students have been experiencing up to date. They have learned helplessness and limiting core beliefs about themselves and their potential. So our first priority is to have the student experience a welcoming, inclusive, safe, comfortable, predictable environment where they can be optimized for learning and build that on their confidence and self-efficacy. And so we do that in a continuum of care. As I had mentioned, we offer a variety of locations that enable the students to continue with services despite the many changes or displacements that we discussed earlier. Programs can be in person at one of hundreds of our centers across the country, or they can be arranged for instruction in your facility or community center in person. And they can also be done live one-on-one instruction, not on demand, but live one-on-one with a tutor. And we could do a combination of any of these as well. We also meet with small groups, all relative to the degree of need. And the benefit is that once a program is funded, that student will be able to continue their services from any of these locations in order to complete their remediation, even if they're moving into different facilities or different areas in that time frame. And as again I mentioned, we try to create a continuum of care by partnering closely with all the educational stakeholders on behalf of the student. We act as an advocate for the student in all settings. So not only our own setting, but we will go into the schools and meet with those folks there to ensure there's a bridge built between what we do at Huntington, what's happening at the school or facility, and should that student go back into a public school setting, we would support them there as well. With also the monthly progress meetings that we have to review student development, testing results, all of that. And so we do all of this in support of support of publicly funded educational services. So we have an entire division and department devoted to publicly funded partnerships with Title I and Title II and a number of other public and private funds, providing foundational tutoring in reading, writing, math, study skills, subject-specific tutoring, test prep as SAT, ACT, GED, HiSET, ASVAB, AP, etc., as well as homeschool, compensatory, supplemental education, and resources for families and educators. Our results here are students that were tested at the start of their program and after 50 hours of instruction, which again is about 8 days of school time, and they improved their math and reading scores by 35 and 33% to overcome learning loss. And this represents an increase of greater than 1 grade level, as I'd mentioned. So we can see that early educational intervention with supplemental tutoring can help to prevent the loss of a student's skills, confidence, and motivation, and can ensure a stronger academic foundation for better long-term youth, family, and even our community's outcomes. So happy to answer any questions if you put those into the Q&A. And I will now turn it over to Paul. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody had a wonderful day. It is Thursday, one more day closer to Friday and the weekend. So my name is Paul Sheffield. I work with FullMind. FullMind is a online virtual teaching company. We provide certified educators and we build programs with our partners. And that's what everything is with us. We are a partnership. So we design programs and implement them together. I'm going to give a couple of examples of a few that we've run in the juvenile justice system a little bit later on. But I do want to give you just a quick little backstory. So our CEO, he was arrested for robbery in the first degree, possession of stolen property, and assault with a deadly weapon at 15. And now he is a CEO of a very successful company. So just to give you an idea of the types of folks that do work here with us, that is a great example of somebody who has been through the system and came out on the other side of that very successfully. He grew up in the South Bronx. And those of you that know New York, you know the South Bronx is not the easiest place to reside. A lot of difficulties there, but he came out on top, and this was his success story. Me personally, I was an educator in New York for 20 years. I ran a lot of restorative and reentry programs when I was a dean in a middle school that were also extremely successful. And we strictly worked with school districts for a very long time. And after just, really thinking about where we can also provide more impact, I was brought into the idea of the juvenile justice system, of where we know that there are a lot of kids that are, wrong choices, wrong decisions, and they wind up in the system. And within that system, a lot of times their academic needs are not met, as well as their social emotional needs. And I don't think anything that I'm going to go through on here is going to be things that you don't know, but I just want to go, just very, very casually go through this, speak to it, and then hopefully have some questions at the end of that. So for us as a company, we really focus on providing full-time staff that can be special education, general education. We also do credit recovery. We do STEM programs. We work with English language learners. And again, every program that we run, it is a certified educator that is delivering the instruction on that program. So you can go on to the next slide. So what is the current teacher, yep, there you go. Thank you. The landscape right now, and again, this is no surprise. We know that there is a shortage. It is not something that is going to go away. It is something that is continuing to get worse. And, a lot of the reason behind that is, from what we all know, it can be teacher burnout. There's, multiple times where it can be also based on salary or whatever the case is. And to me, the scariest part is that I travel around to a lot of colleges and I talk to folks who are in charge of the education department in schools, and the enrollment is significantly down. In some cases, some folks that I've met with or have known from my past of working here, they're actually considering completely shutting down their education department because of the people just aren't enrolling to become teachers anymore. And we, I think, just have to do a better job as a whole to figure out how we're going to get very important people in front of children, or it's just going to continue to impact them and their learning. And when we talk about, it doesn't matter if you are in a school or if you are in a detention center, when you struggle with learning, behavior, and that academic piece, they go hand in hand. So a lot of times we're working with students that really, really struggle. They are either embarrassed in a classroom, so they act out. And with the continued piece on the side of why teachers are leaving and not having teachers who are certified in the content areas and have the experience and the expertise to deliver instruction, it's just, I don't know, it's not going to get any better. So on the next slide, we can look at why teachers are leaving. And, the lowest one, an early retirement incentive, is provided. But if we go all the way through to the top, is dissatisfaction. So we have a lot of teachers that just aren't satisfied with their jobs. A lot of teachers are being overworked. They're being asked to do more and more and more. And the one thing that I always felt while I was teaching is that I would be asked to do more and more and more, but there was no compensation that came along with that more and more. But, as a person and just as a dedicated professional, I always did more and more, but not everybody feels that way or works that way. And I do genuinely believe that every person that has gone into education, they did go into it for a reason, and that is to help kids. And it just gets to a point where you do it for so long, you become burnt out. The stress of, just everything being added onto your plate and being continued to ask to, whether it's cover classes or teach outside of, what your certification is. And, and the shift too of having, parents coming in, after teachers, or, whatever the reason is, it's just, we're seeing it dramatically. We work with some school districts where we have 20 to 30 teachers staffed within these districts, and they are virtual. Very, very successful, but it is a sign of what is going on in real time. And it's pretty scary and sad to really think about where this is going. On the next slide that I have up, just how this all impacts students, just in general. You're looking at, and maybe not so much in the juvenile detention centers based on what your population looks like, or, the facility that you are in, but you have unqualified teachers there. There is a shortage of subs as well as a shortage of certified teachers, increasing the class sizes and the lack of the specialized instruction. So when we really break this down, a lot of times what happens is the mandate from the state, and a special education teacher needing to follow the goals for an IEP and be able to participate in any end of the year meetings. It's just not happening with someone who is a professional. We have those folks on staff. We place them in schools all over the country. We place them in facilities throughout the country. And it really allows the school or the facility to have someone who is certified in that content area, who knows how to write IEPs, who knows how to work with students with special needs, and is able to be extremely successful. And the testament for us is I can talk about this all day, but our teachers they are amazing. And the work that they do and their dedication is just, it rings true with the relationships they form with their students. And I think that is, I'm going to take the word think out of it. For me, I know that the most important part of successful instruction is these kids need to trust you. They need to feel that you care, and they just need a little love. And if you're providing that as an adult, that a lot of these kids don't get at home, doesn't matter if you're in a public school, a private school, or in a facility, when you have that person in front of them that can provide that, you're going to see success, and you're going to see improvement in the work that they're doing. We can go on to the next slide. So we have, how does this, impact the juvenile justice system? I'm sure right now, if I were to ask, and I don't have to type it in the chat, but where your shortcomings are, where you're struggling to fill or even just offer courses in general for your students. And I know it's all over. I know that's math, it's science, it's special education. There's no limit anymore to where we're getting certified folks from to come in to be able to deliver this instruction. And this really shows a disparity between public schools on the next slide and in the juvenile justice system. So I just taking algebra and geometry in your maths of the difference between in a juvenile justice school and a traditional high school, the percentages of access to a math class. And you can see as they go down once you get to algebra 2. Also credit recovery programs where that is lacking as well. And then the pass rates, that all falls into to the same specifics of where or how can we improve upon this. And I've had conversations with a lot of folks in different areas of the country and facilities. And what I hear a lot is that, hey, listen, we have the biology teacher. The problem is that a lot of our kids that have been here for 3+ years, 2+ years, they've taken biology 5 or 6 times already. They've gone through, they're taking it semester after semester because they do not have another course to offer, because they don't have the staff. So those are the conversations that I'm having on my end is, well, we do have folks that can come in and deliver that instruction that are certified in your state. And now you're opening it up and you're offering more to your kids that are there. So a lot of those, it can be electives, it can be STEM programs, whatever the need is, we really work together as a partner to build and design these programs. And they can be a full-time position, or it can be a one-off. A lot of what we've done, just to I'll give you an example of the facilities that we worked with in New York. So in New York State, there was, I had a gentleman came into me and we were speaking, and just where they were deficient for students to earn credits so that they could graduate. 2 of the areas, one was on the screen right now, which is algebra. The other one was health. And we were able to provide them with a certified health teacher and a certified algebra teacher. So at the end of the school year, the students were able to get credit granted from the state, so they earned credit in health. And I really love the health program in particular, because our teacher that was on that assignment, And it wasn't just all right, here's the topics we're going to cover, or we're just going to teach to you. She actually had them at the end of the program. They all designed their own posters based off of one of the topics that was discussed. And they took those posters and they put them in one of their units that had to be anonymous. And then they were voted on for, whatever they had done their poster on. And it really gave these kids a sense of ownership, a sense of pride. And it was just such an important piece that I took away from it as a person in general who really cares about education, is that's what we want. We want to be able to have these kids feel that ownership, feel the pride, feel successful. And when you can do that, I just think sky's the limit. And it doesn't matter if you are a kid who's, in the system, if you're a kid in public school who's been struggling, if you can get that adult in front of you in a school setting to be able to provide that and bring that out of you. I'm sure all of us can probably think of that teacher that we had that did that for us at some point during our schooling. It just makes all the difference in the world. And that's how we really work too, is that we are very selective in pairing up which teachers are placed on what assignments. And in some cases, whether it's a facility or a school district, you actually meet the teacher first to make sure that there's someone that you feel will be a good fit for your school community. On the next slide, it's a little bit older, but it hasn't really changed. It's actually, I would say it's increased or sorry, decreased as far as earning high school course credits, being enrolled in the local school district, earning a GED. I've had those discussions as well of starting GED programs so that we can get these kids to at least earn a GED. And then you go into the post-secondary piece and even getting accepted into it. So, again, I really don't think that I'm not sitting here telling any of you on this call what you don't know, but I do really just want you to understand and know that there are solutions out there that are successful and can come in and take a lot of the stress and anxieties, things that keep you up at night, having to have other folks just in a classroom where possibly learning isn't even taking place because there isn't a certified person in there. And we can really be, as far as our company goes, a company that comes in and really assists in those situations. We can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So these are from going back and just researching and looking in, these are the impacts of the teacher shortages in the juvenile justice system. I already mentioned the lack of access to basic algebra and geometry classes. The credit recovery is huge. I've been having a lot of those conversations too, of knowing, especially this time of year, depending on where you are and how your school year runs, is a lot of these kids are coming in way behind, and we're able to provide these programs and build and design them and customize them and implement them so that students do earn their credit for whatever courses they're deficient in. This one was a little shocking to me that there are 15% of juvenile facilities that they're under 20 hours of instruction per week, with some offering fewer than 5 hours. And I know that's not because that it's not somebody sitting there saying we don't want to do this. It's because we don't have the staff to do this. And we're seeing this more and more. And it's just again, an area where Full Mind can come in and support and be the reason why you can do that. On the next one, so ineffective strategies, we already pretty much talked about. Again, my main focus is on filling these gaps with certified live streamed educators, and us being able to do that as a company, and again, seeing the success of those programs has been nothing short of amazing. And the response from the folks at the facilities, the response from the students there, obviously with anything, it takes some adjustment and getting used to. But once it's up and running, it is a really beautiful thing to see. And it's so meaningful. And it's a big reason why I love the job that I get to do, is because I get to be a part of this. I get to be a part of kids being successful. And on the next slide that we have coming up, I just wanted to put this up there. So this was from the Office of Children and Family Services in New York. And I worked with the amazing principal at one of the school sites, Joe Gleason. And I just felt this was important to share, to really have an understanding of how we work as a company. And it's a partnership, it's a team, it's us working together with you, building these programs, designing them, ensuring that we're meeting your expectations. So this is just one example of one of the facilities that we worked in New York. And then on the next slide, The sound's on. This is about 4 minutes. Just to give you an idea of what we bring as far as the educators that come in. And I'm not picking up any sound on my side.
Yeah, not here either.
Life devoted to education because it's my opportunity to be able to be a servant leader and to give back to so many people that have given to me. Growing up now in Allendale is different. The community has taken a turn. We used to be a community that had lots of businesses that were here. There's not as much industry. There are not as many activities for the children to be involved in. So as superintendent of Allendale County Schools, some of the challenges that I face are trying to make sure that I have quality teachers in front of my students, making sure they have effective instructional leadership, and recruiting teachers to come to such a small area.
All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I want to go ahead and chime in here so we can do something special. My name is Sean Blanchard, and I'm an educator and education consultant. Being from Detroit, essentially education is what saved me and booted me out of my own community to be able to go on to college and go from there. I knew that I had to turn around and make sure I could do the same thing to other people. What I once needed myself, I wanted to make sure that I could become that need for others.
I am Carolyn Reynolds, and I am a virtual educator with Full Mind, currently working at Allendale County Schools. All right, guys, I need you logged into the Gim Kit. The code is up on the screen.
So Full Mind is helping Allendale solve our teacher shortage. Going through Full Mind provides us with a quality certified instructional teacher. So it's just like that person is here. I always say that that person can do everything except for bus duty. They are part of the professional development. They can do tutorial services. They do the teaching one-on-one with the children. They have parent conferences. So it's basically having someone here on staff, but they're just in the virtual world.
Virtual instructors that we've had, they are amazing. They have reached our students as if they were standing right in the classroom.
My master's degree in instructional technology is really useful when it comes to virtual teaching. I'm able to think outside of the box, to be able to tailor and personalize instruction for all the students as a whole, but also each individual student.
I'm accustomed to teaching high school and college. So at the end of the day, you're about to work. Now, at first, there's moans, there are groans, and students, they don't want to do all this. But what ends up happening is they become accustomed to doing the work and they assimilate to the expectation of excellence. And then in the end of the school year, we see that their test scores, they're through the roof.
Mr. Blanchard, he's one of the best teachers I've ever seen.
This one was tight, but it is divine. All right, give a hand clap for divine. Excellent. Excellent job.
He has made some great relationships with our 7th graders. The children trust him. He's built in them a sense of confidence. Sean believes that they can do the work.
My students did so well that I actually was awarded a Teacher of Excellence Award. So it was amazing that I actually had the chance to go to Allendale. It was special because I got to actually surprise my students and they're going crazy. You would have thought that Drake popped up or something.
I always say that I'm the mama to my students. These are my kids. But this year specifically, I was able to go on a field trip with the students to Tybee Island. By the time I see them in person, they are running for me. They see me across the parking lot and they come charging.
When you're in a small rural community, you have to be willing to try something new. You have to be willing to go out and seek innovative strategies to bring to your students, because innovation is there. You just got to figure out how to make it fit.
As educators, we're always trying to figure out how can we maximize technology to help our students learn. In rural schools, sometimes we're limited with resources. Sometimes we're limited to access to get places. Technology can bring things to us.
Full Mind provides an opportunity for young people to connect with certified educators that can educate at a high level. And that perfect marriage is a space where more schools and districts all around the country and all around the world need to dive into.
All right, thank you. We're good on that. I appreciate it. Thanks for getting the sound on too. So that is us in a nutshell. Like I mentioned before, I love what I do. I believe in what I do. And I know that, you know, where we're going in this world of the virtual piece of it and the instruction, it is it's a great space to be in. And as you can see, it can be extremely effective when it's done right. So thank you so much for your time. And I will turn it over to Stephanie.
Had to wait for a pop-up to pop down before I could turn on my sound. I hope everybody is having an amazing day. You guys have been sitting here for an hour, so thanks for hanging in there. So I'm Stephanie Savely. I'm the founder of Lift. We're the creators of Life Skills Reimagined. And if you could go to the next slide. So Life Skills Reimagined is a social enterprise, and our mission is to use online learning and digital sharing because we believe they're powerful tools for social justice. When I founded Lyft in 2017, it was not to be a curriculum company. Our goal was just to be a small e-learning company in Cincinnati. And actually, our mission was to hire youth who are coming out of foster care, coming out of juvenile justice to come work for us. Doing online learning, creating digital content is kind of fun, doesn't take a lot of academic training to be able to get in there. And so we got up and running. We hired our first amazing young woman. And as we were doing that, we were networking with other organizations in our community who were working with both youth and adults towards self-sufficiency. And so from the youth side, that was everything from foster care, people who are working in juvenile justice, people who are working in youth homeless programs, alternative schools. On that adult side, it was people in corrections reentry programs, again, homeless programs, drug rehab programs. And as we were doing that, the same issue kept coming up. People just kept talking about needing a different way to do life skills education. So probably after like our 10th conversation, we are looking at each other around the room and going, okay, well, this seems like it's a thing. So let's maybe start digging into this a little bit. So what started out as what we thought was going to be a pretty small research process ended up into being 9 months long. During that 9 months, talking to everybody that would talk to us, looking at every curriculum we could get our hands on, and really trying to understand what worked, what doesn't work, what are the barriers to implementation, and then obviously what would good look like. And so through that process, we actually, and the reason I have my consulting experience up there in the slide is just simply that we took a consultant approach. So really looking at this is a societal problem. It's not a JJ problem. It's not a foster care problem. It's a societal problem. And so if we were to get involved and try and be part of the solution, what could that look like? So as I mentioned, it's a huge problem across the country, even in traditional two-parent families and households. Life skills education has been declining across the country, and our kids are struggling. And we actually are in our third generation of youth who have not received kind of a formal life skills education as part of their school curriculum. So 3 generations where things like family sciences and home ec have really been pushed to the side. So with that, it has a huge impact. So I've got a short video, 2 minutes long, that is going to give you a quick overview of the problem and what we're seeing in youth. There is no voiceover, so you might want to look at the screen. And I'm not hearing any sound. There should be sound, just not voiceover. Is there any way to turn on the music? Awesome. You can go to the next slide. So that was a little quieter than it typically is. Normally you'd be dancing in your seat, but hopefully if you were able to catch the text on screen, you get a good idea of the fact that, again, our youth are struggling. When we have 33% of youth are not financially, and not just youth, millennials and Gen Zers. So that is people up to 42 years old are not financially self-sufficient. It's a problem. And so with that, it's even harder when we're looking at justice involved youth. They have so many more barriers than even a traditional youth does. Some of those barriers, criminal thinking and behaviors. So essentially that, all the things that have gotten them to where they are, those become kind of entrenched. Those become our way of life. Those become the things that we do to survive. And those very things become impediments to us being able to lead a successful, self-sufficient life. Obviously, educational barriers. I think Sarah and Paul have covered that pretty substantially, but youth in juvenile justice, it's harder. It's just harder for them to be able to attain these skills than anybody else. Then employment. A lot of times when we are looking at a traditional teenager or traditional young adult, right, they're out there, they are getting employment, they are having those experiences. But when we're confined, when we have those restraints, we're not getting that natural experience that we'd naturally get. So we're walking in kind of at a deficit compared to other youth our age. More mental health and substance abuse issues. This is kind of a chicken and an egg because we have youth coming in who have significant emotional trauma. That leads to those mental health issues, substance abuse, which is used to medicate a lot of those mental health issues. And that has a direct impact on the brain's ability to learn, to be able to absorb information. The use of marijuana specifically has a direct impact on the brain's efficiency. And that becomes especially important after they turn 24 or 25. And the lack of supports or role models. Obviously, one of the huge things about being able to become self-sufficient, whether you're in foster care or traditional family or juvenile justice, is that you need to know what good looks like. And if you've grown up in an environment where you've never seen somebody get up and go to work, or you haven't heard conversations around the dinner table about how you handled conflict on the job, then you don't know what you're even supposed to do, or you don't know what you're even supposed to learn. And so being able to bring supports around these youth to give them the knowledge and the skills they need is incredibly important. So with that, if we go to the next slide. In a JJ facility, in JJ in general, there are challenges, and we've already talked about a lot of those. When it comes to independent living skills or life skills in particular, because of that disassociation from the school, a lot of times our schools just don't think about it, right? It's not their responsibility. We are focused on basic literacy, which is incredibly important. We're focused on getting that diploma, getting that GED, both of which are completely critical because we know that education is the number one determiner of self-sufficiency in our country. And our teachers, they've got a hard job. We've already talked about how hard they're working and how understaffed we are. So they're focused on what they need to do and, not necessarily on other things they can bring in to kind of round out that learner experience. So even if you do want to bring in a program, then who's going to teach it, right? One of the challenges of life skills implementation and barriers to implementation is just the fact that it covers so many different things. And very few people actually go to school to be able to teach these things anymore. And so even if you have somebody who really knows that personal finance part, they may not know the others. And so bringing together the team to be able to do it is really difficult. There's not a lot of curriculums out there, and historically, very, very few good curriculums. Life skills was just always naturally thought to be taught in the home. And we know now that that's not the case. And then obviously, even if you do have a curriculum, even if you do have a desire, right, who's going to teach it? So when we encountered this problem, and you can go to the next slide, when we encountered this problem and started down a research process to determine what would a good solution look like, if we were to have an impact on this one thing, what would that look like? So bringing in the 25 years of consulting experience to Fortune 500 companies, we didn't think about it as to what would check the box, but we took a traditional classic problem-solving approach, which was let's figure out what the issues are, what are those barriers, what are all the boxes that need to be checked to make something work, and then how can we create something to fill that need. So our checklist looks something like this, and whether or not you're looking at something like life skills or imagine building something internally or looking for other curriculums, these are good, solid things that are really important to an independent living approach. When we first put together this list, number one, simple to use or implement, was actually at the bottom. And after doing a lot of thinking, it moved all the way to the top because the fact is, if you have something that's difficult to use that your instructors or whoever your team is doesn't really want to engage with, it's complicated, it may only work one way, then it's not going to be used and the rest doesn't matter, right? If you can't have the ability to implement it, if it's not simple, nothing else matters. From there, the right content. One of the challenges when we look at things like independent living skills is what do we cover? And we know from an emotional trauma perspective that we can't talk about tangible skills like personal finance, like getting a job, without the context of the emotional trauma, without the context of emotion involving and being part of every single decision I make. Right? If I have ADHD and spending is one of my challenges to get that dopamine release, then that has to be taken into account. If I'm on the job and I can't take negative feedback and I get angry and I storm out, obviously going to be a problem moving forward. So you can't address either in a vacuum. They have to be done together. Evidence-based instructional design. When we talk about evidence-based and instructional design, it has changed so much in the last 30 years. And it all comes down to neuroscience. We had a lot of theories about neuroscience, but it wasn't until the 1990s, so not very long ago, when we actually started seeing what the brain was doing in action. And that has impacted everything that we do. There were theories from the 1880s about forgetting that we have confirmed since using technology and neuroscience. So when we talk about evidence-based, it really all comes back to the neuroscience. So everything we have learned about learning and how our brains want to receive information, how our brains retain information, how short-term memory and long-term memory work together. We have to take into consideration adolescent brain development. Again, in the 90s, we thought adolescent brains were fixed. We thought from like 9 or 10 up, they didn't change. And now we know that it's a highly experiential time and our brains completely rewire themselves. And if we don't take all of those things that are happening and changes in the brain that are happening, we'll be working against it instead of with it in making that solution. Then trauma informed. If there is any underlying theme across all of the different types of organizations that we work with, is the vast majority of our learners have a significant amount of emotional trauma. Emotional trauma, as Sarah was talking about, highly affects our learning. It affects our ability to access the learning parts of the cognitive function parts of our brain. And if we don't create learning that takes those things into account, so how can we keep things interesting but not distracting? How can we talk about things in a way that makes people feel relaxed, that makes them feel like the content is approachable and not something that they need to be afraid of? And if we're talking about being trauma informed, that also means, especially with our youth who have encountered challenges, how do we give them the skills to be able to change those behaviors? So, how can we bring in principles of cognitive behavioral therapy into the actual curriculum to be able to get them to think differently, to assess what they're different, to be able to think strategically about their life and where they want to go? Then we have the right modality. We have known it since the 1990s, again, it was a great decade, that how we are taught information has a direct impact on how well we remember it. But it's only been in the last 10 years where we can actually economically create learning in the brain in the way our brains actually want it. So that's multisensory, that's having multiple inputs. If you're not on the edge of learning theory, which I'm guessing most people aren't, the idea of a person having an individual learning style has actually been debunked. And even if we think we have an individual learning style, our preferred way of learning is not necessarily the way we actually learn. So bringing in multisensory, so multiple learning styles all in one component. So we're getting learners through multiple ways, and that makes that information stick more effectively. Also, specifically the use of animation, at least in our approach. We believe animation is actually pretty strategic choice and in life skills. And one of the reasons for that is, again, it's very approachable. It's very simple. I'm not looking at somebody who, looks like a professional person trying to teach me something and feeling like I'm dumb or I'm not going to learn. So it's highly accessible. We can bring in all kinds of different ethnicities through the animation. One of the goals of Life Skills Reimagined in particular is that we want a learner to see at least one person in the curriculum that they can directly relate to. Then obviously accessible and with a wide cognitive range. Sarah covered all of those things that come into accessibility and disabilities. But when we talk about accessibility, that covers so many different areas. So obviously we're talking about the really obvious ones, right? It's people with vision impairment, people with hearing impairments. But how can we make a learning as receptive to someone with autism as a high potential high school student who doesn't have any of those issues? So being able to develop training that works in all of those modalities and has all of those accessibility features so learners can even kind of pick and choose the ways that they want to absorb some of that content. And with that also is a wide cognitive range, right? When you've got a classroom and specifically alternative schools or juvenile justice, your classrooms, your cognitive range is really wide. You have pretty smart kids in there who, aside from making a couple dumb decisions, shouldn't be there. You have other kids who just maybe shouldn't be there either, or, again, have been lured into bad decisions. But with that, the same learners need to learn the same information. So how can we make it fit a wide cognitive range? And again, a lot of that is through that multisensory approach. And then obviously proven to teach. Sometimes, especially in schools, sometimes we forget this because it's not like your average curriculum book, textbook, whatever, has gone through actual testing to determine whether or not it can teach, right? It's how we interpret it. It's how we use our own skills to be able to learn from it. So being able to have something where going in the door, learners are actually, when they're going through the content, they're going to be learning, they're going to be retaining, and it's going to be there for the long term. Next slide. So when we talk about easy to use or simple to use, one of the biggest challenges we found is that, right, you buy a program or you have a curriculum and it is designed to be done in a very specific way. And when you purchase that program, that's great. All your ducks in a row. You are fully confident that this is going to work. Then life happens, right? You have 2 teachers leave, you have COVID happen, and suddenly what was going to be this great program is just not functional anymore. So one of the creations and one of the goals of creation of Life Skills Reimagined when we put it together was to fix that, was to make sure that it worked in multiple different ways. So it can be completely self-paced, self-directed. So if you have a learner who walks in the door and you do have the advantage of having some technology, you can set them down in front of the piece of technology. They can go through the content completely on their own. And if they're going through completely on their own, there are multiple parts of the blended learning. So there's animated videos, there are application guides, there are additional resources, and obviously discussions are part of the design. But even if a learner is just watching the videos, they are learning a ton with absolutely no additional intervention. And so we track all of our data by how much a learner actually does the accessory materials and how much conversation they have. And we know that they are still learning a ton. It can be done one-on-one in case management or therapy. So in that sort of setting, maybe you sit down and walk through the content with them to start with, and then maybe you have them, do it before you get together and be able to work through it. So it gets something that can be used both with your teachers and your social workers and your therapists in the school. And it can also be done in a group. One of the great things about all of these is that it is not reliant on just one piece of technology. So if you do have technology, we have ways that your individual learners can access it. If you don't have technology, you can use it in a group setting where we can still have a way to process those learning records, but you can show it on screen, you can use it in a group, and you don't have to worry about those technology constraints. And you don't have to choose. Maybe there's content that you do as a group because it's really important to have that conversation. And maybe there's content they do on their own, but it can be mix or match in any one of those modalities. Next slide, please. When you have flexibility, you have the ability to use it in different places. So in probation and diversion, we have a lot of groups who are using it as their court-ordered program. So with that, the learners are going in, they may be completely self-directed. They have a due date when it's done. Their PO, checks in on them, answers any questions they may have. But at the end, they have a certificate of completion and a learning record that they can hand over to that judge. In detention, I know one of the biggest challenges in detention is you're supposed to be offering educational services right away, but it may be a while before you actually get those learning records. So in detention or in facilities, while you're waiting for all those assessments and information to come, they can sit down with the curriculum, start it right away, start on some of that resiliency content that starts to address that emotional trauma. And you can fill that gap while you're getting all the rest of your ducks in a row. It can also be used for a high school elective credit. There is enough content and we can judge proficiency to be able to qualify as a half Carnegie credit. It can be used for educational downtime, just to keep the youth busy, to give them something to engage in. And a lot of our groups in juvenile justice actually use it for a curriculum that they transition learners to immediately after they do get their GED or diploma. And so it's just the next step of that educational process to get them up and running. One of the interesting things that you can do with the Life Skills Reimagined approach is that account can actually move with the learner through the system. And so if they're in detention and they go to a facility, that account can move with them. And so they have the ability to continue what they're doing without the usual starts and stops of a traditional curriculum. Next slide. So when you're thinking about a curriculum, I'd mentioned content. In all of our research, when we put together our strategy and what we decided to put into content, we did not start from scratch. There are a lot of amazing groups out there who have done a lot of work in this area. So foster care and Casey, the Casey family programs, they've done a lot of work in determining what is truly needed. Even the World Health Organization, has weighed in on what is needed. So we didn't start from scratch. But what differed in our approach to determining what to cover is we came up with everything that needed to be covered first. Then we decided how to group it. So in that way, we didn't miss some of the details that if we started with the titles first and then figured out what went under it, excuse me. So some of the content that you absolutely need in a program, personal finance. Our personal finance education in the United States is quite horrific. So there are only 23 states in the country that have a personal finance requirement as part of graduation. So this is something that is absolutely foundational, and it's amazing how much even adults don't know in these areas. Resiliency, when we're talking about emotional trauma, when we're talking about a life story and everything that goes into that life and everything that happens to you and how that affects you moving forward. Again, you can't address any of that in a vacuum. So learning about all of those things, learning how to manage your conflict and manage your emotions, be able to self-regulate in the context of everything else you do in daily living. Obviously, communication skills. With communication skills, obviously foundational to everything, to our jobs, to our schools. We interact with youth through our support on a daily basis, and it is quite alarming sometimes, the communications we get from youth, because they haven't been taught proper communications and how to actually even give somebody the amount of information they need to be able to help you. Getting and keeping a job, there's really 3 phases to that, and a lot of things focus on the getting, but the keeping is just as important. Especially since COVID, we as a society have struggled with people actually staying in a job. So with getting and keeping a job, there's truly 3 phases. There's how am I going to decide what I'm going to do? How am I going to actually get prepared to be able to do that and get a job? And then how am I going to actually keep that job? independent living. So once I'm out, how do I keep that employment? How do I keep that apartment? How do I stay and become a functioning member of society? And then lastly, pregnancy and parenting, we just recently have added to our curriculum. And we considered it in the very beginning, but we kind of assumed that there were other organizations out there who specialize in this, who are doing things and doing them well. But we found out that that wasn't necessarily the case. And we had an overwhelming request for content in this area. So, and one of the important parts of that is the fact that when we can bring in things like pregnancy and parenting, we're starting to affect the generation, right? We're starting to make sure that the things that happen to us aren't happening to the next generation. And things as simple as making sure our babies aren't born with fetal alcohol or drug addiction is incredibly critical to making sure our next generation does that much better than we did. Next slide. So just a couple things on the program itself. As I mentioned, it's turnkey. We have the same program gets implemented for all groups. How you implement it, we've got a lot of different ways to do that, but it's very simple and can be very, very fast. That blended learning curriculum, and it's still housed in an LMS. So you have all those learning records, all that data for both in reports or even if you're doing grant writing. For JJ, we have multiple secure access options. And so we have specific profiles for juvenile justice learners to close down that access. Next slide. And just a little bit about our data. When we talk about making it easy, being able to ensure that learners actually like it is kind of important. So 96% of the learners in foster care and juvenile justice who have completed the curriculum would recommend it to others. We track that by gender, gender identity, race, ethnicity, and even sexual orientation. We know that some of these groups just simply have different outcomes, and we want to make sure it feels authentic to everyone. Next slide. And these are the knowledge gains that we see. So personal finance, getting a job, keeping a job, communication skills. The orange is youth. So we see anywhere from a 13 to a 60% in knowledge, depending on the topic. So 60% increase in knowledge in personal finance, about a 42% increase in getting and keeping a job. And this data is actually a little skewed with foster care. We're seeing a 13% increase in communication skills, but in JJ, we actually see a 20% increase. So we even see different numbers across the groups. If you are looking for a life skills curriculum and you just want to know what to look for, one of the things we're going to be sending out is our white paper on our evidence-based design. You can use that as a roadmap. So as you're looking at different things, and if you would love to partner, we'd love to talk to you. But our biggest concern is making sure that learners actually get this stuff. So if you want to use our white paper as a way to figure out what the right solution for your organization is, we will send that out to you and make sure you get it. So you have the ability to use all of our research and all of our information to figure out what the best solution for you is. And I know we are right on time, so we should probably turn it over to questions.
So much good stuff today. Thank you. I did see a hand here there raised. I don't have any questions in the chat or the Q&A. So if anybody has anything to share or any questions to ask, now is a time to do that. If you have anything you want to put in the chat box, or you can go ahead and put it in the Q&A. I just wanted to thank everybody and again remind folks that this information will be going out next week with all kinds of extra added resources. So that'll be good for you. And we have all of our contact information there. You can just take a picture of that. That'll lead you to all of our websites. And we will all be at the CJJA Winter Business Meeting next month. So we do hope to see you there and have good conversations about the ways in which education can really open doors to the youth in your care and in your facilities. Not seeing any other questions. We'll stay on just another moment or two in case any pop up. Any final words? Thank you, Kevin, Stephanie, and Paul. Anything left to say?
Just thank you. Appreciate everybody's time on a Thursday evening, and happy holidays to everybody.
Absolutely. Have a great evening.
Yes. Thanks to everybody. I do see one hand up. Pamela Richter Boss. Pam, do you have a question you want to ask? Maybe not. Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I saw that hand up earlier. I'd asked her to put it in the chat, but I didn't see anything pop up in the chat.
Oh, we got a
No,
sorry
we're
no.
good.
Okay.
All right.
It's a high five. All good.
Thank you so much, everybody. And again, we hope you have a wonderful, warm, happy, healthy holiday season. And we hope to see you in Orlando where it's nice and toasty. Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everybody.